On October 26, 1998, a somber atmosphere descended as a chilling discovery was made along the banks of the Columbia River. A body was found floating near Lower River Road in Vancouver, sparking shock throughout the local community. Authorities swiftly responded to the scene, eager to determine the identity of the unfortunate individual who had met an untimely end. As they approached the body, the strong smell of decay indicated that the man had been in the water for a significant period. With no immediate clues to his identity, they carefully removed the body from the water and transported it away for the meticulous tasks of identification and autopsy to begin. Little did they know that this was the start of a mystery that would continue to weigh on their minds for years to come. As the medical examiner's office began the process of an autopsy on the unidentified man's body, a chilling truth emerged. The autopsy revealed he had died from a gunshot wound to the head. But as investigators pored over the evidence, they were left with more questions than answers. Had the man taken his own life? Had someone else pulled the trigger? The truth remained shrouded in uncertainty. But that wasn't all. It was believed that the man had been in the water for anywhere from 6 months to a year, and this left authorities scrambling to piece together a timeline of events leading up to his tragic end. Despite the passage of time, the medical examiner's office was also able to estimate the man's age at the time of his death, putting him at around 53 years old. These findings only deepened the mystery surrounding the case. Who was this man, and how had he met such a grisly end? The investigators faced a daunting challenge in their quest to uncover the truth behind the man's tragic end. They knew they had to first identify who he was, but it was a task easier said than done. For the man had been found with no means of identification, leaving authorities with no starting point. The investigators turned to the records of missing persons in the area hoping to find a lead. But their search came up empty, leaving them with no idea who the remains could have belonged to. Desperate for answers, they cast a wider net, notifying agencies throughout the Northwest in the hopes that someone, somewhere could identify the unknown victim. Despite their tireless efforts, however, their search proved fruitless. Another thing that could have helped investigators in uncovering the man's identity was fingerprints. However, the hope of this was dashed due to the advanced state of decomposition of the body. As days turned into weeks, the investigation seemed to be hitting a brick wall. Frustration began to set in as the investigators were no closer to solving the mystery of the man's identity or his untimely demise. He remained an unknown John Doe, a haunting reminder of the many unanswered questions surrounding the case. Despite their best effort, the case gradually slipped into obscurity. Another mystery in a world full of them. The investigators had done all they could, but the truth remained tantalizingly out of reach. The passage of time can sometimes be a double-edged sword when it comes to solving cold cases. While it may seem like hope fades with each passing year, the truth is that new technology and advancements in forensic science can breathe new life into a case once thought to be unsolvable. In 2008, the investigators working on the case decided to take a fresh look at the evidence. Armed with the latest forensic tools and techniques, they reached out to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification, hoping that the advancements in DNA profiling would finally lead them to the answers they so desperately sought. The University of North Texas Center for Human Identification was able to develop a DNA profile of the unidentified male from samples taken during the autopsy. The DNA profile was a ray of hope for investigators, who wasted no time in submitting it to the National DNA Database, eagerly waiting for a match. But despite their best efforts, no match was found. The DNA profile had given them a new lead to follow, but it also reminded them of just how difficult it can be to solve a case with no definitive clues. Still, the investigators refused to give up hope. They knew that with each new development in the field of forensic science, the chance of finally unlocking the mystery of the man found in the river grew ever greater. After years of the unidentified man's case going cold, investigators were determined to finally uncover the truth. Around 2021, they decided to take a fresh approach and submitted a DNA sample from the remains to a renowned forensic DNA laboratory in Virginia, Bode Technology. With their expertise in extracting DNA from challenging samples, the scientists at Bode Technology eagerly took on the challenge. They knew that by analyzing the DNA sample, they could unlock the secrets to the identity of this mysterious John Doe. A forensic genealogist used DNA from the remains to trace the person's ancestry. Through meticulous research and comparison, the forensic genealogist discovered an ancestral link to a family from California. The lead was promising, and the genealogist pointed to one person in particular, the son of Chelsea Johnson Jr. and Ruth Marie Henson. Interestingly, this individual named Michael Johnson had no traceable activities since 1998. The investigators knew they had struck gold and were now one step closer to finally unraveling the identity of the mysterious John Doe. And so, as the autumn leaves fell in October 2022, Nikki Costa, the operations manager of the medical examiner's office, made a breakthrough in the case of the unidentified man. Nikki managed to track down Chelsea and Ruth Johnson's other children, Russell Johnson and Kathy Bergen, and they revealed some startling information. Apparently, their brother Michael had disappeared without a trace over 2 decades ago and had cut off all contact with the family. Could this be the missing link that investigators had been searching for all these years? Nikki was bent on solving the case of the unidentified man. She tirelessly pursued the lead that the DNA sample belonged to Michael. To confirm her suspicions, Nikki reached out to multiple agencies determined to find the missing piece of the puzzle. The California Department of Justice Missing Persons DNA program provided analysis of family reference samples, while the Wasatch County Sheriff's Office collected a DNA sample from Johnson's sister, Kathy. Meanwhile, the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification sent its DNA profile, which was developed in 2008, to California's Missing Persons Program for comparison. With all the evidence gathered, Clark County's chief medical examiner, Dr. Martha Burt, finally concluded that the unidentified man was indeed Michael. Nikki's persistence and the collaborative efforts of multiple agencies had finally given the man a name and a chance at justice. The mysterious circumstances surrounding Michael's death remain a puzzle to investigators who have yet to uncover any information about his activities leading up to the discovery of his body. Nevertheless, the discovery of his identity was a huge breakthrough in the case, giving investigators a starting point to unravel the mystery. Now, authorities are reaching out to the public for help, hoping that someone might come forward with information that could shed light on what happened to Michael. Every little bit of information could make a difference, and authorities are eager to get to the bottom of this perplexing case. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. On June 19, 1970, a splendid summer day unfolded as 2 young men opted for a casual stroll along Independence Pass in Twin Lakes, Colorado. The air was fresh, the sun radiant, a perfect backdrop for their hike. Yet, their outing took a grim twist when they unexpectedly encountered a macabre sight. While walking along the road, they spotted the decomposed body of a man in a ditch on the north side, partly obscured by rocks that had tumbled down from the slope above. But that wasn't the worst part. As the 2 men got closer, they noticed that the entire left arm and rib cage of the body were missing. It was a gruesome sight, and their hearts raced with fear and confusion. The body was dressed in a tattered sweatshirt and gray trousers, and the smell of decay was overwhelming. Who was this man? What had happened to him? There were questions that plagued their minds as they stood there stunned by what they had just discovered. Without wasting a single moment, the 2 men contacted the authorities, who arrived at the scene with a sense of urgency. As they approached the decomposed body, they suspected that the man was in his early 20s. The officers carefully examined the scene, taking note of every detail that could help them solve the mystery. In addition to the missing left arm and rib cage, the officers also noticed that the man was wearing 3 pairs of socks and hiking shoes. They even found a sock pulled over his left shoe. But that wasn't the only odd thing they found. Upon searching the man's pockets, they found $7 and a razor, but those items offered little insight into the man's identity or the circumstances of his death. No wallet or ID was found on the man, leaving the officers to wonder who he was and what had happened to him. Officers also extensively searched the area around the body, hoping to find any clues, but to no avail. The man's remains were quickly removed from the scene and taken for analysis, but despite their best efforts, detectives couldn't identify him. They scoured missing person reports, interviewed locals, and even searched through dental records, but nothing seemed to match. The man was a complete enigma, and the mystery only deepened as they delved deeper. The officers were perplexed by the condition of the body. It seemed as though the man had been out in the elements for a long time, possibly all winter. Yet his clothing didn't seem appropriate for such harsh conditions. The officers also couldn't help but wonder, what could have happened to the missing body parts? Had they been removed post-mortem, or had they been eaten by wild animals? It was a gruesome thought, but it was a possibility they couldn't ignore. The officers could only speculate until a shocking discovery was made. On July 15, 1970, more than 3 weeks after the body was found, a state highway maintenance man found the missing limb below the road where the body had been discovered. The shoulder and arm were stripped down to the bone, but the hand and wrist still had flesh on them. The discovery only deepened the mystery. How had the limb ended up there, and why was it separated from the body? The condition in which the body part was found was perplexing, leading the officers to speculate that it could have been removed after the man died, possibly by a snowplow, but they had no concrete evidence. As the years passed, the mysterious man found Independence Pass became nothing more than a forgotten memory. The lack of identification left him with no name and was simply identified as Independence Pass John Doe. He was relegated to the status of an unknown soul buried beneath a simple marker reading unidentified male in the Evergreen Cemetery of Leadville. The case went cold, and as time marched on, it seemed that the truth behind Independence Pass John Doe's identity would remain a mystery forever. In 2011, a man named John Pearson, who had devoted years to cleaning up the Evergreen Cemetery, stumbled upon the grave of the Independence Pass John Doe while cleaning an overgrown section. Pearson, who was also a Vietnam veteran, couldn't help but be curious about the man's identity. He wondered if perhaps Independence Pass John Doe too was a fellow veteran of the Vietnam War. Pearson's curiosity led him to reach out to Audrey Simpkins, a crime and intelligence analyst with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, who then enlisted the help of Sylvia Pettum, an expert in identifying John and Jane Does. Together, they journeyed to the small town in August 2011, eager to uncover the truth behind the mysterious grave. But despite their efforts, the case once again grew cold, leaving Independence Pass John Doe's identity shrouded in secrecy for a little while longer. In 2013, after 2 years of silence, the case of the Independence Pass John Doe started to gain momentum. Audrey and Sylvia returned to Leadville and searched for the case records, only to find out that they were missing. Together with the then coroner Shannon Kent, they made sure that the case details were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Person Systems database. Sylvia, a determined woman, then asked the Lake County Sheriff to exhume the remains of the John Doe to enable DNA sampling. The body was exhumed, and with the help of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, a fingerprint was obtained. DNA was extracted from the John Doe's femur and skull at the University of Northern Texas, and hope was renewed for finally identifying the unknown man. But instead of being laid to rest in his grave at Evergreen Cemetery, John Doe's body remained in a casket in the office of former Lake County Coroner Shannon. It took 8 long years for the man to finally be reburied. In the quiet of 2022, a breakthrough was made in the decades-long case. A team of detectives submitted DNA extracted from the unidentified John Doe for forensic genetic genealogy testing. The test yielded a promising lead. Details of this lead remained shrouded in mystery, but it was enough to crack the case wide open. Finally, after all these years, John Doe had a name: Gardner Paul Smith, who would have been just 39 years old when his remains were discovered. Gardner was no longer just a nameless body in a grave. He had a story, a life, and a family. Born in Modesto, California on September 22, 1930, Gardner was the older son of Paul and Bernita Smith and grew up in a skiing family. Both of his parents were skiers, and it was only natural that Gardner and his younger brother, Amor, took up the sport. For Gardner, skiing was more than a hobby. It was a way of life. He attended the University of Nevada in Reno, where he not only studied, but also competed on the college ski team. Gardner's dedication to the sport was admirable, and he was always pushing himself to improve. In fact, he was known to experiment with different techniques, once even attempting giant slalom courses on cross-country skis to work on his balance. But Gardner was more than just an athlete. He was a deep thinker and a humanist, always seeking to understand what it truly meant to be alive. In the latter part of his life, he became fascinated with psychic phenomena and the powers of the mind, and he wanted to unlock the secrets of human consciousness, and he spent countless hours exploring this area of study. In June 1951, Gardner was just a young man when he joined the Army, serving 2 years of active duty and then transferring to the reserves where he served 4 more years. He did his duty honorably and was discharged in June 1957. Gardner's path eventually led him to Argentina, where he met the love of his life, Jennifer Dawn Andrews, in 1961. The two got married, and Gardner brought his new bride back to California. It wasn't long before they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Jean, into the world on June 18, 1962. However, at some point, Gardner left his wife and young daughter. Jennifer eventually obtained a divorce from Gardner in 1968 and went on to marry Ernest M. Dillard. Unfortunately, Ernest passed away in 1974, leaving Jennifer a widow once again. As for Gardner, he drifted between California and Aspen, seemingly unable to settle down after his divorce. Dick Dorworth, an accomplished ski racer and Gardner's longtime friend, vividly recalls the last time he saw him in 1968. Gardner, who was living life on the road, was trying to promote a new ski pole grip he had designed. This was not the first invention he had created, as he had also come up with double-lens goggles but had failed to market it. After a week of crashing on his friend's couch, Gardner vanished into the unknown, never to be seen by Dorworth again. In fact, the last anyone heard from Gardner was through a postcard he sent to his mother, dated November 12, 1969. Simply read, "I am doing all right. Don't worry. Love, Gardner." At the time, his mother was hopeful, but little did she know that it would be the last that she would ever hear from her son. Gardner's daughter Jean was filled with unanswered questions about her father, who disappeared when she was just a baby. For years, she was left to wonder where he had gone and why he never came back for her. Her mother and family members were tight-lipped about his absence, leaving her to piece together her father's life on her own. And it wasn't until decades later in that she finally got some answers, when her father's true identity was discovered. Now a 60-year-old woman with a family of her own, Jean is determined to give her father the honor he deserves. She plans to arrange a small military funeral and have a headstone made in his memory. As for where he will finally be laid to rest, Jean hasn't made up her mind yet. But one thing is for certain: she will always hold a special place in her heart for the father she never got the chance to know. The mystery surrounding Gardner Smith's death persists. While there is no record of an autopsy performed on him, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation reports that there was no evidence of foul play, and speculations about how he died continue to circulate. Some speculate he may have been the victim of a crime and his body was dumped in Independence Pass. Others suggest he may have hiked up there with the intent to hike back down, only to get caught in a sudden storm, become disoriented, and succumb to the cold. However, the truth about Gardner Smith's death remains shrouded in mystery, leaving many unanswered questions. Before we continue, 90% of you haven't subscribed to our channel, so if you like this video, please subscribe. It motivates us to make more content for you. Okay, let's continue. It was a chilly day on November 28, 1992, when something unusual caught the eye of a group of people near the Walker Wildlife Area off River Road in Colorado. As they approached the spot, they were struck with horror. The decomposed body of a man lay there, missing its skull. But even in death, the man was making a statement. He wore green shorts with bold black designs and a tan to black pullover shirt with a mysterious logo on the left side of the chest. The sleeves were cut off at the biceps. The people called it in, and authorities sprang into action, racing to the scene with sirens blaring. As they arrived, they quickly got to work, scouring the area for any clues that could help them identify the man. They searched high and low, turning over every stone, but alas, nothing came up. Even the man's clothes yielded no hints as to his identity, leaving the authorities scratching their heads in bewilderment. With no other choice, they took the body away for autopsy and identification, hoping that they could at least get some answers there. The medical examiner performed the autopsy, and what they discovered left them reeling. The man had been stabbed to death, leaving no doubt it was a case of homicide. The revelation sent shock waves through the community, and fear began to set in. Who would do such a thing and why? The investigators knew that they had their work cut out for them, and they were determined to solve the gruesome crime. Little did they know the road ahead would be filled with twists and turns, leading them down a dark path of mystery and intrigue. The investigation began with a sense of purpose as detectives searched for any lead that could bring them closer to solving the mystery. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, it became clear that this was going to be no ordinary case. The trail was cold, and every lead they pursued led them to a dead end. The absence of the man's head was a puzzle that haunted them day and night. Where could it have gone? Was it taken as a trophy, or was it buried somewhere out of sight? The detectives were determined to get to the bottom of it all, but they were up against a formidable adversary: time. As the months turned into years, the case became colder and colder. The memories of the man in green shorts began to fade, and it seemed as though justice would never be served. However, detectives never gave up hope, and they would one day uncover the truth. Years passed, and new technologies emerged that promised to make their jobs easier. In 2011, the case was revisited, and the National Missing and Unidentified Person Systems was brought in to assist in the investigation. But despite their best efforts, the detectives found themselves once again hitting a dead end. Every lead they pursued seemed to fizzle out, and they were left with nothing but more questions. It was a frustrating time for everyone involved as they grappled with the realization that they may never uncover the man's true identity. But the detectives refused to give up even as the years continued to tick by. They knew that there was always a chance that new information could come to light, and they remained ever vigilant, never letting the case slip completely from their minds. In the year 2022, the Mesa County Sheriff's Office was determined to leave no stone unturned in their quest to bring justice for the man in green shorts. They knew that traditional investigative methods had failed them in the past, so they decided to turn to cutting-edge technology for help. They reached out to Othram, a forensic DNA analysis company, in the hopes that advanced genetic testing could help them finally establish the man's identity or identify a close relative who could provide vital information. It was a long shot, but detectives were willing to try anything to crack the case. But advanced DNA testing doesn't come cheap, and the detectives knew that they would need to secure funding to move forward. So they turned to DNA Solves, a platform that combines crowdfunding, volunteer data, and cutting-edge genomics to solve unsolvable cases. Thanks to the tireless efforts of the detectives and the generosity of the public, the funds were raised and the testing could begin. The skeletal remains of the man in green shorts were a puzzle that had confounded detectives for nearly 3 decades. But the remarkable advancements in forensic science helped them to finally begin putting some of the pieces together. The remains were carefully packaged up and sent to Othram State-of-the-Art Lab in the Woodlands, Texas. There, a team of brilliant forensic scientists worked tirelessly to extract DNA from the bones and build a comprehensive genetic profile for the unknown man. Using a cutting-edge technique called forensic-grade genome sequencing, they were able to piece together a complete DNA sequence, painting a picture of the man's genetic makeup like never before. But having a DNA profile was just the beginning. The team at Othram knew they needed to use this information to generate investigative leads that could help them to identify the man, and that's exactly what they did. With the help of their in-house genealogy team, they employed the power of forensic genetic genealogy to trace the man's distant relatives and create a comprehensive family tree. This information was then shared with the Mesa County Sheriff's Office, who were then able to identify a potential sibling of the unknown man. With the DNA sample from this sibling, the team at Othram was able to confirm that the unidentified man was Edith Thomas E.T. Romero. The discovery of Edith's identity was a significant breakthrough for the Mesa County Sheriff's Office. But with the mystery of his death still unsolved, detectives knew they had to dig deeper to uncover the truth. Edith had come a long way from his early life, but the details of his upbringing remained shrouded in mystery. Despite this, detectives were able to piece together a picture of the man he had become. As detectives delved into his past, They discovered a man who had lived a life of service and sacrifice. His military service was just one example of the courage and bravery that defined him. They discovered that Edith was just 26 years old when he met his untimely end. He had ventured to Grand Junction, Colorado, in the company of 2 other individuals from Louisiana in 1991. He resided in a now demolished house on 4th Street and worked as a dishwasher in a local eatery. The details surrounding his death remained hazy, but it is believed that he was killed during the summer of 1992. Now, as detectives continue to piece together Edith's story, they're asking for the public's help. If you have any information that could shed light on his untimely death, please do not hesitate to contact the authorities. Every little bit of information could bring us closer to the truth. From 1920 to 2006, a member of the Murdaugh family continuously served as the solicitor for the 14 circuits covering 5 counties in South Carolina: Allendale, Hampton, Jasper, Beaufort, and Colleton. The solicitor acts as the primary prosecutor, akin to a district attorney. This long-standing family legacy began with Randolph Murdaugh Sr., who held the position for 20 years until his unfortunate death in a train accident. His son, Randolph Buster Murdaugh Jr., succeeded him and served as solicitor from 1940 to 1986, marking the longest tenure in this role. Upon his retirement, his son Randolph Randy Murdaugh III assumed the position in 1986 and served until 2006. This continuity spanned 3 generations, totaling 86 years of distinguished service in a position of influence and authority. Randy Murdaugh also had 2 sons, potentially positioning them to continue the family legacy in the solicitor's office. The elder son, Randolph Murdaugh IV, and Richard Alexander Alec Murdaugh could potentially follow in their family's footsteps in the future. In my last covering, it appears that he pronounces his name as Alec instead of Alex, but I wasn't really sure until now, so we're just going to make that little correction. The 3 men, until recently, all served as senior attorneys at their family law firm: Peters, Murdaugh, Parker, Ellsroth, and Dietrich. So this is a family that is wealthy, well connected with all levels of the legal system as well as law enforcement. Alec and Maggie met at the University of South Carolina, where they both were students. They married soon after and then had their 2 sons. Alec and Maggie seemed to have a very close relationship until recently. She reportedly often visited Alec at work, and they often had lunch together. The family often attended events together and seemed to have a very active social life, though there are reports from those who knew the family that said they were deeply miserable, quoting, "Money doesn't buy happiness." Now I would like to go into the series of unfortunate events that follow Alec Murdaugh and go through them in chronological order. In the early morning hours on July 8, 2015, a body was found in the middle of a rural road outside Hampton, South Carolina. The victim was identified as 19-year-old Stephen Smith, and his car was located 3 miles away out of gas. Stephen's body was covered in injuries, and his cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma, though it was initially reported on as a gunshot wound due to an injury to his head and a complete lack of any evidence consistent with a hit and run. There were no skid marks on the road, no vehicle debris, broken glass, or injuries associated with being hit by a vehicle. In the incident report, officers also noted that Stephen's shoes were loosely tied, and he was still wearing both. A former highway patrol investigator who was on the scene said that he believes that Stephen's injuries were more consistent with being beaten, and he was left in the road to make it look like a hit and run. His mother also stated that he wouldn't have been walking along the side of the highway. His wallet and cell phone were located inside his vehicle, and he could have called for help. She said that he wouldn't have used the main road. He knew the area extremely well, and he knew to cut through the woods to get home faster. In 2017, Stephen's mother said that the FBI came to see her and requested a few items, which included Stephen's cell phone. It isn't exactly known how the Murdaughs are connected, but their name was mentioned 9 times in the officers' police reports. The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, or also called SLED, also received several tips from the public, asking officers to question Buster Murdaugh about the incident. Stephen's mother believes this was a hate crime, and Stephen was targeted because he was openly gay in a rural southern community. She said in an interview they laid him in the road like a piece of trash. Stephen was a human just like everybody else, and he deserves respect just like anybody else. He might not have been rich, but he was loved. She spoke to local reporters saying it was an uphill battle to get law enforcement to take her concerns seriously. For years, nothing seemed to be happening in the case. However, in 2021, the case was reopened with renewed hope of getting closure. So new court documents have unearthed more to this particular story than what was previously known. On February 26, 2018, the murder family's longtime housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, died. The death was listed as accidental, and it was alleged to have been a trip and fall accident. Alec Murdaugh said that she had tripped over one of the family dogs and fell down a flight of stairs. Her injuries had been severe, and she was in a coma for 3 weeks before her eventual death. She had been employed by the family for over 2 decades. The incident had not been reported to the coroner, and no autopsy was done at the time of her death. More suspiciously, on her death certificate, her cause of death was listed as natural, which is not accurate, and it is unclear whether any sort of official investigation took place, as this was a workplace death and it should have been. Mrs. Satterfield was survived by her 2 sons, and we know these details because they are suing Alec Murdaugh for failing to pay out on a settlement that they had agreed on. The sons never received any of the settlement money, which is why they sued, and during the course of suing, they learned so much more than they had ever thought possible of Alec's murder. They alleged that at their mother's funeral, Alec approached them and said that he would help to take care of them, which included paying them the proceeds from a life insurance policy that had been taken out on Mrs. Satterfield's behalf. Murdaugh suggested an attorney for them to use, a Corey Fleming, but failed to mention that Fleming was a close and personal friend. The sons also alleged that Fleming helped divert $1 million from the settlement back into Meadows using a shell corporation. Okay, so this part is a little bit complicated as I am not a legal professional, but I'm going to break it down how I understand it. It appears that there was a settlement agreed on by the Murdaugh legal team and the legal team representing the sons, which was Corey Fleming. They agreed on a $500,000 settlement. However, it appears that there was a judge's order approving a $4,300,000 settlement, but that figure was never brought for the sons' approval. The document had been signed, but it was never filed with the courts. Out of that $4,300,000, they would have received roughly $2,700,000 after the legal fees were paid. However, the Satterfield family had never been made aware of this figure, just that $500,000 figure. It is alleged that the money was paid out by the insurance company and then accepted into a shell company called Forge, which was owned by Murdaugh, who was then able to funnel the money back to himself to pay off credit debts. There is a legitimate financial consulting firm called Forge, which handles insurance settlements of this nature, though they are not affiliated with the company that accepted the Satterfield settlement. This is a deeply troubling financial fraud scheme, which we will cover more later, and it seems to have required a fairly decent amount of planning. This didn't just kind of accidentally happen. A shell company was formed in order to appear to be a reputable company. It then calls to question whether this was all orchestrated prior to Ms. Satterfield's death. I mean, how many employers take out multi-$1 million life insurance policies for their housekeepers? So far, we only have one side of the lawsuit, and I'm sure more will come out in court with discovery. I'm curious to know when that life insurance policy was taken out, who signed off on the death certificate, and what consequences Corey Fleming will face as he didn't act in his client's best interests, and was actually negligent in not informing them of what the judge signed off as their award. This whole thing seems rotten from the inside out. So what kind of started off with this family being in the media was this 2019 boat crash that resulted in the death of 19-year-old Mallory Beach. It was February 24th, 2019 when Paul Murdaugh, Alec Murdaugh's youngest son, and a group of 5 friends had been driving his father's boat. Paul is seen hours before the accident purchasing alcohol with what was determined to be a fake ID, likely his older brother Buster Murdaugh's ID. The group then goes to a bar in Beaufort, South Carolina, Luther's Rare and Well Done, polishing, purchasing, stumbling, and appearing intoxicated. At 2:20 stumbling and appearing intoxicated. At 2:26 a.m., this call comes into the 911 dispatcher. Officers described the condition of the boat as having a 6-foot gash, where the boat split at the seam. The boat contained numerous empty, partially consumed, and full alcoholic beverages still on ice. 4 of the team were rushed to the hospital, and their Paul's blood was taken to determine his blood alcohol levels. It is unclear at this time why Paul wasn't given a sobriety test at the scene of the crash. It was a hospital that took it upon themselves to make sure that someone at Paul's BAC was 0.286, more than 3 times the legal limit. That night, Mallory's body was not found, and it was presumed that she was deceased. She was recovered by boaters a week later. Her cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma and drowning. The Beach family pressed criminal charges against Paul, but they were dropped when Paul was murdered in June of this year. They still have a civil lawsuit against Alec Murdaugh, which remains, and Connor Cook, the boyfriend of Mallory, has also sued Murdaugh, alleging that the lawyer orchestrated a campaign to falsely blame him for the boat crash in his lawsuit. He also alleges that Myrtle knew Paul had issues with alcohol and had told Paul he couldn't have access to the boat anymore due to a previous history of him driving while intoxicated, but didn't do enough to ensure Paul didn't access the boat. He also said that while at the hospital, Alec Murdaugh arrived and told all of the teens to keep their mouths shut in an attempt to control the narrative. Murdaugh also referred a lawyer for the Cook family, but didn't disclose that the lawyer he had referred was a close personal friend and was also the godfather of Paul. The lawyer advised Connor to not cooperate with law enforcement, which made him appear guilty. Connor obtained a new attorney months later, and his new attorney was able to provide information to law enforcement that led to charges being able to be laid against Paul Murdaugh. Paul had been charged with boating under the influence, causing bodily harm and causing the death in a boat crash. Paul had pleaded not guilty to the charges, and a trial was underway. On June 7, 2021, Alec Murdaugh makes his chilling 911 call at 10:07 p.m. He arrived at the family hunting lodge in Isleton and discovered his wife and son, Paul. The police initially held Alec for questioning, but he was released when his alibi for that evening was confirmed. Alec had been visiting his mother, who has dementia, and was seen by her caretaker. The incident was confirmed as a double homicide, and that the time of death was somewhere between 9 and 9:30 p.m. Some reports have stated that 2 separate weapons were used in the attack, but that hasn't been confirmed yet by authorities. It appears that something was found during the course of this investigation, because this is when we see SLED reopen the investigation for Stephen Smith's death, as well as Gloria Satterfield's. Incriminating evidence was found either on cell phones or computers of the Murdaugh family, though currently that is only speculation. Following Paul's death, the South Carolina Attorney General Office dropped all charges against him. 3 days later, on June 10th, Alex's father, Randolph Murdaugh III, passed following a stretch of poor health. He was 81 at the time of his death, and Alex Murdaugh, all in 1 week, lost his father, his wife, and his youngest son at this point in time. There isn't a lot about these murders that have come to light. Many of the official documents have been heavily redacted, but there is clearly some connection. On September 2nd, Murdaugh's law firm PMPED began an investigation into Alec Murdaugh after finding a suspicious check on his desk. The check was made to him personally, not to the firm, which was what prompted this investigation. It is discovered that Alec was taking money from the firm, as well as clients, and funneling those funds into a personal account. PEMPT was able to track the funds and uncover the fraud. Alec was confronted about the misappropriated funds and was asked for his resignation, and he did so on February 3rd. The following day, the law firm brought their findings to the Hampton County Sheriff's Office and SLED, which started an investigation of suspected criminal activity. A lawsuit was filed in October by the law firm suing Alec Murdaugh, and it is here we learn about how the law firm discovered what was happening. They also discovered the fictitious entity called Forge, which, as we discussed earlier, was made to look like a legitimate financial consulting firm, but it provided no services and had no products for sale. Its creation was established solely to convert money from the law firm to Murdaugh. They claimed that they had no knowledge of what Murdaugh was doing, and said in their lawsuit that because he had disguised the payments using a company that they used regularly, it had evaded detection. This was a company that they used routinely for years, and because Murdaugh knew the ins and outs of how the law firm used this company, he was successful in making these payments look legitimate. PEMP's website has this statement released: the lawyers and employees of PMPED live and work in Hampton, Jasper, Colton, and Beaufort counties. Most of us grew up in the area, attended local schools, worship at area churches, and continue involvement with local civic organizations and charities. We are proud of our communities and are distressed by this tragic situation involving our former partner Alec Murdaugh. The negative attention that this has brought to our community and to our firm is regrettable. PEMPT is a robust firm with skilled, experienced attorneys who represent our clients with a fierce commitment to obtaining justice. We were shocked and dismayed to learn that Alec violated our principles and code of ethics. He lied and he stole from us. No member of PMPD was aware of Alec's scheme. When we learned he betrayed our trust, we requested his resignation immediately. We have yet to speak to anyone who was aware of his addiction to opioids. While Alec's situation is tragic, be assured that the firm is strong and focused on representing its many clients. We provide legal services locally and statewide. We hold ourselves to the highest ethical standards in handling our clients' cases. Despite the widespread recent publicity, we continue to work to represent our clients with the same diligence and professionalism as prior to the discovery of Alex's misdeeds. The funds taken by Alex will not affect current or future operations. No client will suffer a financial loss as a result of Alex's misconduct. We have read the media reports about the lawsuit and settlement resulting from the death of Gloria Satterfield. If these reports are accurate, we are stunned at what occurred. It is important for everyone to know that PMPD did not represent Alec in that case. His insurance company hired counsel to represent him. Like many of you, we have a lot of questions about Alec and what has recently come to light. We don't know the answers, but we will continue assisting law enforcement and other authorities in efforts to find the truth. PEMPT is committed to our clients and community. You can count on us to operate our firm in an honorable and transparent fashion. So the law firm has stated that they are still working with a forensic accountant to see how long this goes back and how much money has gone missing in total. This is still ongoing, and we will likely see an amendment to their lawsuit when they have final figures. Then that brings us to the failed suicide plot. A day after Alec is asked to resign from the firm on September 4th, a 911 call comes from Alec Murdaugh. He claimed that while he was changing a tire, a rogue shooter drove by and attempted to kill him. He was located on the old Sachihatchee Road by himself with a head injury. Reports have been incredibly varied, with his lawyer stating that he had a severe injury with a skull fracture and an entry and exit wound. Though law enforcement noted on reports it was a superficial injury with just a bullet grazing. We did see footage of Alec Murdaugh only days later in court, and he doesn't appear to have any major visible injuries. Certainly no entry and exit wounds, so that to me is interesting. The shooter Curtis Edward Smith has gone on to give several interviews and is currently claiming that he was trying to stop Alec from shooting himself and the gun went off in the struggle. As stated in our previous coverage, Curtis Edward Smith was a one-time client of Murdaugh, but it is also alleged that Smith was the one that provided Murdaugh with illicit substances. On September 6th, Alex made that statement saying that he was resigning from the firm and entering rehab. Later that day, his law firm put out their statement basically saying, oh no, he was fired for stealing. On September 8th, we saw that the South Carolina Supreme Court suspended Alex Murdaugh's law license, effective immediately, as well as the license of Corey Fleming, the lawyer who handled the Gloria Satterfield settlement, misappropriation of corporate funds. There is also the lawsuit from Gloria Satterfield's family, as they haven't received anything from their mother's wrongful death settlement yet. Connor Cook also brought a suit forward against Alex Murdaugh, Buster Murdaugh, and employees that provided alcohol to Paul for their alleged roles in the boat crash that killed Mallory Beach. As of October 19th, Alec Murdaugh is being held in custody. He was denied bond and he has been court-ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation, which will dictate what happens next in this case. There are several civil lawsuits pending and likely more criminal charges upcoming. Once these investigations play out, there are still the ongoing investigations into the death of Stephen Smith, Gloria Satterfield, as well as the homicide of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh. The Murdaugh family are offering a $100,000 reward for any information, leading to an arrest of the person who murdered Maggie and Paul. The first hope this video summed up everything. Clearly there is a lot here and a lot of it happened quite quickly, and this is very much an ongoing investigation. Honestly, there is so much here I wouldn't be surprised if I missed a couple things, but this video is already pretty long. So we're just going to kind of wrap it up and do updates as they come. Let me know what you think down below, and let's chat about it. Drew Peterson was born on January 5, 1954, in Bolingbrook, Illinois. His father, Donald Peterson, served as a Marine, while his mother Betty stayed at home to care for Drew and his two siblings. Donald was known as a strict military man with a drinking problem and a temper, traits that Drew would later emulate in his own life. Throughout his early years, Drew strived to gain his father's approval, but often felt he fell short in Donald's eyes. In 1974, Peterson enlisted in the military and underwent training as a military police officer. That same year, he married his high school sweetheart, Carol Hamilton. Carol was 3 years his junior and was still in her senior year of high school when they married. The couple had 2 sons, Eric and Stephen. In 1977, Drew joined the Bolingbrook Police Department in suburban Chicago. Initially, he was hired on as a military police officer, but was transferred a year later to the Metro Area Narcotics Squad. Peterson excelled as an undercover cop. He was trained to be deceptive and convincing, which was a skill he mastered with ease. Not all cops are able to easily enmesh themselves into the seedy underbelly of the criminal world, but that wasn't a problem for him. However, he began to blur the lines between his job and what he wanted to do. He stopped taking orders from his superiors, believing himself to be bigger than the badge he represented. He started doing his own undercover operations, unauthorized. In 1980, his wife, Carol, leaves him following the discovery that her husband was using undercover Second Life as an excuse to sleep with women. Drew said it was a necessity to gain the trust. Carol disagreed. Carol would be the first and one of the only wives to get spousal support from Drew. Peterson married his second wife, 23-year-old Vicki Rutskiewicz, in 1982, but the couple had dated for years before that, possibly even while he was still married to Carol. Vicki was a bar owner, and Drew didn't like that she had so much going on outside of their marriage. Vicki stated by 1985, Drew was fired from the Bolingbrook Police Department among several accusations of bribery, disobedience, and misconduct. However, he appealed and his union was able to secure his job again, though he would be demoted to a patrol officer. Vicki stated that Drew had placed recording devices throughout their home and monitored her and the children. He would also threaten that he knew how to kill her and make it look like an accident. Their marriage only lasted 10 years. Vicki finally had enough when it was discovered that Peterson was not so subtly dating someone new, Kathleen Sabio. Kathleen was a young and beautiful accountant who was set up with Drew on a blind date. Kathleen had been swept away with gifts, vacations, and the promise of a stable life with a home and children. To Kathleen, Drew was Prince Charming. She believed every tall tale he told her, including that he was divorced, when in actuality he was very much still married. Drew had told her wild lies about Vicki, including that she was a mentally unstable drug addict. Drew warned her that if Vicki ever reached out to her, she should ignore everything because Vicki was so unstable and the divorce wasn't going well. Despite all the red flags, Kathleen and Drew married in 1992, only 6 months after their first date and only weeks after his divorce to Vicki was finalized. The couple had 2 children, and it was after the birth of their second son that Kathleen felt a change in their relationship. Kathleen had settled into motherhood, and much like his first 2 previous marriages, Drew hated when he wasn't the center of attention. In his first marriage, it was after the birth of his first 2 sons that started the deterioration of the marriage, and the second was Vicki's bar that kept her away from home. Drew resented that so much attention was being focused on the children and started abusing Kathleen in retaliation. Drew would call Kathleen fat and ugly, and physical abuse followed. Kathleen would end up in the emergency room on 2 separate occasions. In October 2001, Kathy received an anonymous letter informing her that her husband was dating a 17-year-old girl named Stacy. Kathleen was furious, but when she confronted Drew about it, she was the one that ended up in the ER covered in bruises. It was at that point when Kathleen began documenting the abuse, hiring a divorce attorney, and kicked Drew out of the home, and he moved into an apartment he'd gotten for Stacy. It was a bitter divorce. Drew purchased a home near Kathy to stay close to the children, but it was also to monitor and attempt to intimidate and control Kathleen. She said that once she woke up to Drew hovering over her bed, and she called her sister and told her that she wasn't going to make it to the end of the divorce. She believed Drew was going to kill her. Kathy was going to leave the marriage with half the house, half of Drew's pension, and full custody of their 2 children. The divorce was going to financially devastate Drew, and he was not happy about it. The police were called 18 times to Kathleen's home for trespassing, assault, and battery, and unlawful restraint. Despite this, suffered no consequences. The Bolingbrook Police Department did nothing about the accusations that one of their own was threatening to kill his wife. Kathleen went as far as going above the police department by sending a letter to the Will County Assistant State Attorney, Elizabeth Frigel, outlining the abuse and her fears about her husband, but still nothing was done. Kathleen's divorce is granted on October 10, 2003. At this point, Drew and Stacy have been unofficially married for a year and have already had their first child together. On October 18th, about a week later, Drew and Stacy marry in a low-key official ceremony. Despite the divorce being granted, it still didn't mean freedom for Kathleen. They still had to come to an agreement about dividing the marital assets. They had one more settlement appointment to finalize things, but on March 1st, 2004, Kathleen was found dead in her bathtub, and Drew was one of the first on the scene, as he was with the neighbors when they discovered the body, when he went to drop off his kids after his visitation. Though Drew was initially thought to be a suspect, he was cleared with an airtight alibi. He was home with Stacy that night. Kathleen's death was deemed an accidental drowning. Drew produced a handwritten will signed and dated on March 2, 1997, when he and Kathleen were still married. The will stated that all assets would be left to each other, and Drew would become the benefactor of Kathleen's estate, which included custody of their children, the ability to make funeral arrangements, front desk agent at a hotel. Drew overnight shift as a front desk agent at a hotel. Drew also worked overnight shifts, and they apparently met because his partner was dating Stacy's coworker. Stacy Kales was young, beautiful, full of life, but also a prime target for someone like Drew Peterson. Stacy had grown up in a chaotic household. She grew up around a lot of anger, neglect, abuse, witnessing substance abuse, and when you grow up around that, you look for any light at the end of the tunnel. Her mother had also disappeared under mysterious circumstances in 1998, and her case remains unsolved. When Stacy turned 17, the legal age of consent in Illinois, Stacy told her sister that she was dating Drew and that he had bought and furnished an apartment for her. Stacy was a sweet girl. She had a loving nature and loved kids. She wanted to be a mom more than anything. And even after Kathleen died, she took over as a maternal figure to Kathleen's boys, loving them just as she did her own children. Stacy was also swept up in Drew's romance. He bought her gifts and took her places, did fun things, and promised her a life that she had always wanted. Stacy's older sister didn't approve of the relationship. Among her concerns was the 30-year age gap between the couple, and she thought Stacy was much too young to be dating anyone, let alone dating someone so much older. Stacy gets pregnant in 2002 and gives birth to her first son, Anthony, in July of 2003. She marries Drew in the fall of 2003 when she was 19 and he was 49. All of this happening while Drew was going through his divorce with Lane. Again, Drew told familiar lies about his soon-to-be ex-wife, including that she was unstable and was abusing drugs, both of which were completely untrue. In 2005, Stacy has her second child, a daughter 31. The death devastated Stacy, and she starts to experience severe depression and anxiety. At the same time, her relationship with Drew begins to sour. Stacy, in addition to being a mom, was also working towards her nursing degree, meaning there was little time for Drew with 4 kids, school, and maintaining their home. As we saw with his other marriages, this doesn't go over well with Drew. Stacy doesn't talk to too many people about what's going on at home. She kept a lot of it to herself. Though knowing how Drew treated Kathleen, we can speculate that Stacy was treated much the same. At some point, Stacy had cosmetic surgery. She had breast plants put in. Perhaps Drew had also made her feel bad about her body or coerced her into having surgery. By 2007, Stacy seemed to have enough of Drew. She started opening up to family as well as her pastor. She wanted out, but she didn't want to end up like Kathleen. Stacy told her sister that Drew was acting super possessive, accusing her of cheating on him. He would monitor where she went, how long she was gone for, and follow her. Stacy felt that her marriage had. Candace said that Stacy seemed stressed out and frazzled. Candace felt that Stacy seemed to be experiencing domestic violence and offered for her and the kids to come back with her to California. Stacy said that she would think about it and told Candace that she wanted to leave her marriage. Stacy also met with her pastor, who had served as her and Drew's marriage counselor. She sought advice and told him more about what was really going on in the marriage. She said that Drew was intensely jealous and it was unbearable. She also thought he was stalking her or had other police officers stalking her. She didn't feel safe calling law enforcement, and she made a shocking revelation. She said that she knew Drew killed Kathleen. The night that she had died, Drew hadn't been with her that night. He'd been gone for several hours in the middle of the night, and he told her to lie to police. Unwell, she mentioned to her sister that she didn't feel taken it well. She mentioned to her sister that she didn't feel safe in their home. She said that she had plans to meet with a divorce lawyer the following week. Stacy's sister, Cassandra, began to spend more time at Stacy's house. Drew was usually on his best behavior when others were around, and Stacy felt more comfortable when she wasn't alone. Cassandra leaves Stacy's home at 11:30 p.m. on October 27th. The two had plans to meet the following day at 10 a.m. The following day, Stacy failed to show up, and Cassandra was unable to get in touch with her. A neighbor the next morning notices noon. She noticed Stacy's car was missing. She went over, noon. She noticed Stacy's car was missing. She went over and asked Drew where Stacy was, and he told her that Stacy had gone to her grandfather's house. He asked if she could watch the kids for a few minutes, which she did, and Drew left for about 15 minutes. Drew also called in sick for work that day, saying that he had unused accumulated sick time that he wanted to use before his retirement in January. Cassandra continues to attempt to get in touch with Stacy. She goes over to see Drew at 11 p.m. when she notices neither of the Peterson vehicles are in the driveway. Drew tells her that Stacy left him for another man. He said that she took $25,000, her car, and her bikinis. Cassandra knew something bad had happened right away. Given Stacy's fears, she knew that she would leave her children with Drew. She would also never willingly abandon her children. They were her whole world. Cassandra left and immediately filed a police report. She goes to another police department, the Downers Grove Police Department, but they tell her to go to the Bolingbrook PD. Reluctantly, she files there, and Drew was tipped off at 2 a.m. She also drove to the Illinois State Police Department and filed a statewide missing persons report. On October 29th, Tom Murphy, Drew's stepbrother, is admitted to the following a suicide attempt. He claimed that the night Stacy disappeared, Drew had called him and asked him to move something. A blue bin that Drew had removed from his bedroom and asked for help putting into his car. Tom said that Drew told him this never happened. Tom came to the horrifying conclusion that he had helped get Stacy's body out of the house. The guilt tore at him and he was scared of Drew and he attempted to kill himself. Tom was offered an immunity deal and he wore a wire in attempt to get Peterson to say something incriminating. Nothing comes of the call, but Tom says that in days leading up to Stacy's disappearance, Drew had asked him to kill Stacy, but he said that he couldn't. Drew started a media campaign. He goes on Larry King Live, The Today Show, countless radio shows to talk about his missing wife. His campaign goal was simple: paint Stacy as an emotionally unstable individual who had cheated and left him for some tropical destination. A search warrant was executed on November 1st. The household computers, cell phones, vehicles, and firearms were seized. It was also announced that Kathleen Sabio's death would be re-examined. On November 9th, Drew was announced as a suspect in Stacy's disappearance, and Kathleen's body is exhumed. Drew is suspended without pay when it's determined that Kathleen had extensive bruising and a 1-inch gash on the back of her head. Her death didn't appear to be accidental after all. A re-examination of the crime scene photos determined that the death may have been staged to look like an accident. And on November 12th, Drew resigned from the Bolingbrook Police Department. They accepted his resignation, and Drew was able to retire with an annual pension of $72,000 a year. Drew continues his bizarre behavior with reporters. 2 separate forensic pathologists, one paid for by the state and the other privately paid for by the Savios family, both conclude their findings of Kathleen's autopsy to be foul play. Meanwhile, An extensive investigation begins to locate Stacy. Drew hired statement confirming that he was engaged to 23-year-old Christina Rains. Drew continued to keep himself in the media, though as time went on they became less about finding Stacy and more about clearing his name in the suspicions around his last two wives. In April of 2008, he took to the media again and said he was offering a $25,000 reward for any information leading to the safe return of his wife, Stacy. He said in a statement, "Her mom left her, and it's clear that history has repeated itself and that Stacy does not want to be found either," says Peterson. "I don't know whom she left with or where they are. Maybe the money will prompt someone to come for the first time on felony weapons charges." One of the guns that were seized from his home was an AR-15 assault rifle that was too short under state law. Another charge was added when it was discovered that he had illegally transferred Kathleen Savio. Again, he pleaded not guilty, but this time he was held on a $20 million bond and he remained in custody. There was mounting evidence against Drew, including a witness that came forward, a former friend of Drew, who'd said that he'd been asked by Drew to take care of Kathleen. Again, as we saw so many times before, the media circus continued to swirl around Drew Peterson. The judge was even forced to issue a gag order to stop Drew and his media team from doing any more interviews. Drew's legal team tries everything to try and get this case dismissed. They even brought on a team of legal students to help them find grounds to get the case thrown out. All efforts were refuted and the trial continues in May of 2012. Despite a lack of physical evidence connecting Drew to the crime, there were numerous testimonies from witnesses, including Drew's first two wives, that illustrated what it was like to be married to Drew and what it was like when the relationship had run its course. The abuse, the threats, the misuse of his badge and position as a police officer, as well as his history of violence. The prosecution's star witness was Stacy and Drew's pastor, who testified as to what Stacy had told him during their final counseling session. The moment during the trial that would hit a home run for the prosecution was when Drew's defense called Stacy's divorce attorney to the stand. It seemed that they had miscalculated what the lawyer was going to say. They thought his testimony would paint Stacy as a vindictive ex-wife looking to take everything from Drew. Instead, the lawyer told the courts what Stacy had told him. On September 6, 2012, the jury comes back with their verdict, and Drew Peterson is found guilty of first-degree murder. At his sentencing hearing, he screams in court, "I did not kill Kathleen." To which Kathleen's sister says, "Yes, you did." Peterson was sentenced to 38 years in prison for the death of his third wife, Kathleen Sabios. While Drew is in prison, the search continues to find anything to connect Peterson to the disappearance of Stacy. He was being recorded in prison when investigators get a bombshell. From behind bars, Drew was trying to arrange to have the state's attorney, James Glasgow, killed. Peterson is charged again, this time for solicitation to commit murder, and has a second trial in 2016. This trial is much faster, and the jury only took an hour to deliberate. Drew Peterson was found guilty and sentenced to 40 more years in prison. His police pension is also revoked. Today, Drew Peterson remains behind bars. He was transferred to the Terre Haute Federal Correctional Institution to a more secure facility in 2017, and that is where he remains. He continues to maintain his innocence in the murder of Kathleen Sabio and Stacy Peterson. As of this year, Stacy Peterson has been missing for 14 years and is presumed to be deceased. Her children are now in the custody of one of Kathleen's sons. Stacy's sister, Cassandra, continues the search. She claims that she knows the location of her remains, but hasn't been able to recover them. At her own expense, she has hired numerous experts to help her and remain hopeful that one day she's able to give her sister a proper resting place. The incident occurred in Green Bay, a city in Wisconsin situated on the shores of Lake Michigan. With a population of approximately 104,000 residents, it ranks as the third largest city in the state. Green Bay is renowned for its fervent football culture and is the proud home of the Green Bay Packers, a highly successful team in the National Football League. The city boasts a diverse economy supported by sectors such as healthcare, education, manufacturing, and tourism. Visitors to Green Bay can enjoy exploring attractions like the National Railroad Museum, Bay Beach Amusement Park, and the charming historic downtown area. It was here in Green Bay that a tragic murder took place in 1986. On April 18, 1964, a bright-eyed baby girl was born. Her name was Lisa Holstead. Raised by a strong, resilient single mother named Judith Karen Perot Thompson, Lisa's childhood was not without its challenges. Her father, Frank Holstead, was absent from her life, but that didn't stop Lisa from shining bright. From an early age, she exhibited a curious mind and a creative spirit that defined her life. She grew up with two loving older sisters, Deborah, who is 3 years older, and Susan, who is 2 years older than Lisa. They were always there for her, to lend a listening ear or as a shoulder to cry on. Lisa felt a sense of security and warmth with them that could not be easily replicated. Her older brother, Stephen Halstead, who was 5 years older than her, was her protector and always looked out for his little sister and made sure she felt safe and loved. Despite the financial struggles of being raised by a single mother, their love for each other was unwavering. Judith worked tirelessly to provide for her children, and her love for them knew no bounds. Lisa Holstead had a passion for horseback riding and was also artistic and sketched during her spare time. However, her life took an unexpected turn when she got pregnant at the age of 17 and gave birth to her beloved son, Jeremy, in 1981. Despite the challenges she faced, Lisa was a loving and devoted mother who doted on her son. She worked tirelessly to ensure that Jeremy had the best life possible. Her kind, outgoing, and creative personality shone through as she raised Jeremy on her own, just like her own mother had raised her and her siblings. Lisa Holstead was a woman of courage and independence. Despite the comfort of living with her family, she yearned for something more. So, she made the brave decision to move across the country to Los Angeles to pursue her dreams in 1981. After some time, she realized that what she truly wanted was a stable and peaceful life for her and her son, Jeremy. She found that in the town of Green Bay in Wisconsin, where they settled and made a home in 1982. While she never attended college, Lisa was determined to continue her education and took a goal-oriented, non-credit adult learning course at the Northeastern Wisconsin Technical Institute between 1983 and 1984. By the time she returned to Green Bay in 1986, Lisa was only 22 years old, but she had already accomplished so much. With her son by her side, who was now 5 years old, she was ready to take on whatever challenges came her way in this new chapter of their lives. She had even found love again with a man named John Sott, with whom she shared a cozy home in Green Bay. The couple enjoyed simple pleasures, like fishing and playing darts together, and even had a quirky collection of pets, an eel and a bird named Herbie. Lisa's love for her family and her zest for life were evident in everything she did, and she cherished every moment spent with her loved ones. However, fate had a cruel twist in store for her, and her bright future was tragically cut short. On August 12, 1986, the moon was high in the sky in Wisconsin, as Lisa and John embarked on a late-night adventure. Lisa and John seemed to be having a great time, their competitive spirits shining through, as they played game after game of darts. But as that night came to a close, tension began to rise, and the alcohol seemed to take its toll. When they were driving back home, the car came to a stop at the intersection of Mason and Taylor Street at 2:30 a.m. Lisa and John had been having an argument, and she opened the door and stepped out in the cool night air. The argument with John had left her feeling frustrated and upset, and she needed to clear her head. She told John that she would walk home and that he could go ahead and get some rest. He hoped that she would come back soon and that they could make up and put this argument behind them. As the hours passed and the sun began to rise over the quiet town of Green Bay, John's worry grew into a gnawing sense of dread. Lisa still hadn't returned, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He scoured the streets and alleys, calling out her name, but there was no response. Desperately, he made his way to the police station and reported her missing, and his heart was heavy with fear and uncertainty. After just an hour of John reporting her missing, a gruesome discovery was made by two unsuspecting workers in the Canaries Nature Park. It was an ordinary day for the workers. As they made their way along the riverbank, something caught their eye. A hand jutting out from the water's surface. Intrigued, they pulled their truck to a stop and approached the water's edge. What they found there would haunt them forever. The lifeless body of a woman lying partially unclothed, as if she had been cast aside like an unwanted object. They immediately called the authorities, and within minutes, the officers from the Green Bay Police Department arrived at the scene and were met with a gruesome sight. The unknown woman's lifeless body lay in the marsh, surrounded by tall reeds and murky water. The detectives tried to secure the area to gather any evidence. As the detectives combed through the marsh in search of any clues that could lead them to the woman's identity, they stumbled upon a small piece of fabric poking out from under the murky waters. With a sense of urgency, they waded through the marsh to retrieve the fabric, and upon closer inspection, they discovered an identity card hidden in the back pocket of a pair of jeans. It was then that they were able to confirm the victim's identity as Lisa Holstead. When they approached her body, they saw the telltale marks on her neck, grim evidence that she had been strangled to death, and the case was ruled as a homicide. The autopsy report delivered a gruesome account of Lisa's final moments. Her blood alcohol level was found to be sky-high, clocking in at a staggering 0.25%, well beyond the legal limit at that time. The autopsy further revealed that she had suffered from multiple wounds that left her body streaked with blood, a sight that could haunt even the bravest of souls. Worse still, the medical examiner's findings pointed to a heinous sexual assault as the primary cause of her death. The only hope they had was the foreign DNA sample that they had managed to extract from the victim's body. The discovery of the DNA was like finding a needle in a haystack for the police. They knew it was a crucial piece of evidence, but they didn't have a suspect to match it to. The tiny sample was carefully stored away like a precious gemstone. The detectives hoped that someday, technology would catch up to the potential of this evidence and give them the answers they desperately sought. The news of Lisa's death spread like wildfire, leaving a trail of grief in its wake. Her boyfriend John was shattered by the loss of the woman he loved, racked with guilt for the final argument, and haunted by the fact that he could have done more to keep her safe. Her family was plunged into a world of pain and confusion. The police moved swiftly to investigate, interviewing everyone who might have had a motive to harm Lisa. Detectives followed up on every lead, questioned every suspect, and revisited the crime scene numerous times in the years that followed. But nothing seemed to break the case wide open. They even went back to the drawing board numerous times, piecing together any possible lead or hint that could lead to the identity of Lisa's killer. But their efforts were met with dead ends. The passage of time only seemed to add another layer of obscurity to the case. Evidence deteriorated, and potential suspects slipped out of sight. The case was eventually archived and sat gathering dust on a shelf for over 30 years. But in 2020, after 34 years of the case lying cold, hope again flickered as Detective David Graff from the GBPD reopened the case and took the lead in the investigation. With dogged determination, he and his team combed through the old case files, and their eyes fell upon a small vial forgotten in the back of the storage unit. Inside was the key to unlocking the case, the DNA of the perpetrator. It was time to bring in the latest forensic technology behind her brutal murder. He reached out to a pioneer in the space, Othram, a company specializing in forensic genetic genealogy, hoping to unlock the secrets of the killer's identity. This cutting-edge technology would not only reveal more about the suspect, but also provide a fascinating insight into the killer's familial connections. With this new knowledge, the detective was finally able to unravel the twisted web of this cold case. The DNA was sent for analysis in June 2020, and when the results came back from the lab, the Green Bay Police Department found themselves with a wealth of information about their suspect. With every bit of information gleaned from the DNA analysis, the police were one step closer to the killer. The police started carefully tracing the family trees of distant relatives of the person. Piece by piece, they constructed a web of connections until they had built 10 to 15 different family trees. As the investigation progressed, they scoured databases and websites to find groups of people who could potentially be related to the victim. After much investigation and digging, they stumbled upon a group of individuals living in other states. Following their trail, they found a connection to Wisconsin, and finally, the trail led them to Green Bay, the very place where the brutal murder took place. The police found a family member who had been living in Green Bay in 1986, the same year the crime was committed. Finally, after countless hours of work, they found a suspect whose DNA potentially matched the sample taken at the crime scene. The long-awaited breakthrough had come at last. The man was Luke Griffin, and investigators found that Luke already had a history of violence against women, including strangulation, and had been released on parole from the Green Bay Correctional Institution, where he had been serving time for the heinous crime of second-degree sexual assault. What shocked them the most was that Luke had a previous conviction for sexual assault in 1981, a fact that had gone unnoticed during the initial investigation. It seemed that the police had missed a vital clue that had been right in front of them all this time. However, thanks to the groundbreaking technology of forensic genetic genealogy and the tireless work of Detective David Graff and his team, Luke's past finally caught up with him. With a suspect in their sights, the investigators knew they had to be absolutely certain before making an arrest. They needed to test Luke Griffin's DNA against the profile from the crime scene. So, in September 2020, the police embarked on a thrilling mission to track down their prime suspect, Luke Griffin, who had moved to the city of Racine. The Green Bay detectives joined forces with the Racine County authorities, the FBI, and DCI to put Griffin under surveillance, hoping to uncover evidence against him. The hunt was on for Luke, and the authorities were not going to let him out of their sights. They trailed him to another town in Wisconsin, watching his every move. On September 18, 2020, while they were watching him, they saw him disposing of some beer cans in a dumpster and carelessly tossing a cigarette butt on the ground. Little did he know that these seemingly insignificant acts would lead to his undoing. The discarded items were quickly collected by the police and sent back to the lab for further DNA testing. The results came back on September 29, 2020, and the authorities were ecstatic. The DNA was a perfect match to that found at the crime scene over 3 decades ago. On October 28, 2020, at around 6 a.m., there was the sound of handcuffs clicking into place as Luke was escorted out of his home. Neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains, whispering amongst themselves as a police car drove away with Luke to Brown County Jail. In the interrogation room, Luke sat stone-faced as he denied any involvement in the murder. When the questioning intensified, Luke's resolve began to waver, and he finally confessed to having a sexual encounter with the victim. But he claimed that his memory of that night was hazy at best, citing intoxication with drugs and alcohol as a reason for his confusion. As the details of the crime unfolded, it became clear that Luke's intoxication had clouded his memory, and he was unable to recall the events that led to Lisa's death. The once elusive suspect was now in custody. In 2021, it was time for his trial. The courtroom was packed with reporters, family members of the victim, and curious onlookers as Luke Griffin entered, flanked by guards. All eyes were on him as he took his seat at the defendant's table. Luke's fate honed in the balance as the trial began and the prosecution presented their evidence. The jury listened intently, absorbing every detail of the case. Luke recounted the events of that fateful night in 1986 and told the jury that he had simply stopped at McDonald's and then taken a route that happened to pass by the spot where Lisa's body was later discovered. But with every word he spoke, the weight of the crime he committed seemed to hang heavier on his shoulders. As the trial went on, the evidence against him continued to mount, until finally, the jury was left with no choice but to make a decision. And Luke was booked on a first-degree homicide charge, and his bail was set at $1 million after a long and grueling legal battle. On January 27, 2023, Luke made a dramatic decision to plead no contest to the charge of homicide by reckless conduct. Again, the courtroom was tense as the judge read out the verdict, and Peter Hain, one of Luke's attorneys, argued for a more lenient sentence, citing Luke's poor health and the 2 years he had already spent in jail. However, Judge Timothy Hinkfist was unmoved by Hain's request, stating that Luke's lack of accountability and failure to take responsibility had only continued to victimize Holstead's family. Hinkfist went on to explain that the sentence he was able to give was limited by the laws in place at the time of the crime and that current Wisconsin law only allows for a maximum of 40 years for homicide by reckless conduct, a Class C felony. There was a collective gasp from the crowd as Luke was found guilty of the crime, and was charged with first-degree intentional homicide. It was a bittersweet victory for the prosecution, who had worked tirelessly to bring justice for their victim's family. On March 27, 2023, 67-year-old Luke Griffin was sentenced to 10 years in prison, the maximum penalty available under the law in 1986. Under the old sentencing law, Luke can be released after serving 2/3 of his sentence. He was also granted 2.5 years of time served, which means he could be released in 4.5 years and is eligible for parole in less than 6 months. The legal battle surrounding the case had been intensely fought since 2020, according to the Brown County Circuit Court Judge Timothy Hinkfuss. When delivering the sentence, Judge Hinkfuss acknowledged that Lisa Halstead's murder was a despicable and heinous act, but was constrained by the laws in effect at the time of the crime. Despite acknowledging the maximum sentence was woefully inadequate, Brown County District Attorney David Lassie called for it to be imposed, citing the severity of the crime and its impact on the victim's family. He failed to take accountability and avoided justice for 34 years. Lassie said, "The impact that has had on the family is significant. The family members' emotional impact was evident through the hearing, and they made it clear that no sentence could bring back their beloved Lisa." The courtroom was filled with emotion when 5 of Halstead's family members stood before the judge to deliver their witness statements. Their voices trembled with grief and anger when they recounted the pain and trauma they had endured for over 3 decades. One sister, a brother, a niece, a son, and a granddaughter all spoke passionately, sharing the impact the long, cold case had on their family. They described the void left by their beloved sister, mother, and grandmother, and expressed their disappointment with the maximum sentence available. Stephen Halstead's, Lisa's brother's voice was thick with emotion as he addressed the man who had caused his family so much pain. "The pain it caused our family cannot even be described to you," he said, his eyes fixed on Luke. "Many tears. I have thought about Lisa all these years. Every day, it's been 13,377 days since you murdered her." They painted a picture of a kind and loving woman, a devoted mother to her young son. The family spoke of Lisa's creative spirit, her love for art and music, and her trusting and outgoing nature. They shared that they had few photos of Lisa and no videos, but one family member brought a framed picture of her to the stand, and another played an audio recording of her singing as a child. The case of Lisa Halstead is a testament to the power of perseverance and the remarkable advances in forensic technology that have been made in recent years. While it may have seemed like an unsolvable mystery for decades, the tireless efforts of law enforcement and the use of cutting-edge forensic techniques ultimately led to justice being served. What sentence do you think Luke deserves for his crime? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. It was in Boone where a heartbreaking murder occurred in 1976. Born in the scenic state of Kentucky, amidst rolling hills and tranquil streams, a new life began on November 28, 1959. Daniel Henry Claver and Betty Jane Meek Reneker radiated happiness as they welcomed their beloved baby girl, Carol Sue Claver, into the world. Her older brother, Thomas Claver, eagerly embraced his new role as her sibling. Carol was known for her remarkable sense of humor. She was extremely modest for a teenager and had a lot of empathy for underprivileged people. She was a volunteer at St. Charles Nursing Home at the age of 16. Carol had also been a Brownie and Girl Scout in her younger days. She enjoyed cooking, sewing, playing records, and was always into music. At the age of 5, her piano lessons also started. Carol was also learning violin, and she had been chosen by her piano teacher Hattie Schatzman to represent her students at the Ohio Music Teacher Association. Carol played twice at the Taft Museum. Her passion for music and natural talent made her a beloved member of the Dixie Heights High School String Ensemble, and her classmates were drawn to her outgoing and kind personality. On June 5, 1976, the sun shone brightly over the quaint town of Union, Kentucky, as the residents began their day like any other. Dr. Gaines Huey, a well-regarded dentist from Walton, left his house early to make his way to work, ready to tend to his patients' dental needs. As he was driving down Chambers Road, he noticed something out of the ordinary at the edge of the road. With curiosity, he pulled over and walked towards the object. It was only when he got close he realized what he had found. A body lying eerily still next to a culvert that served as a drainpipe for rainwater. In a state of shock and with trembling hands, he called the Kentucky State Police. Trooper Jan Wuchner happened to be on duty that day. Wuchner, a seasoned investigator who had previously served with the Boone County Sheriff's Department, quickly rushed to the scene to unravel the mystery of the lifeless body lying by the roadside. The detectives from the Walton State Police Department arrived at the crime scene at around 7:15 a.m., their eyes scanning the area with an acute attention to detail. As the detectives began their investigation, they noticed the telltale signs of a struggle. Broken twigs and trampled grass hinted at a violent scuffle, and a few feet away was the body of the victim, with injuries betraying she had been attacked and strangled. With a growing sense of dread, the investigators came to the grim realization that this was not a random act of violence, but a deliberate and calculated murder. The investigators were determined to leave no stone unturned in their quest for justice. But despite their best efforts, they couldn't find any concrete evidence at the crime scene. Frustrated at the loss, they decided to turn to the body of the victim for answers. Her body was sent to the county's medical examiner's lab for a thorough autopsy. The medical examiner performed a painstaking autopsy, carefully analyzing every inch of the victim's body for clues. Every cut, bruise, and wound was carefully documented, and every clue analyzed with precision. The results of the autopsy revealed the brutal truth of her death. The evidence suggested that she had been subjected to a vicious beating, her body bearing the telltale signs of a tire iron used with unrelenting force. The once beautiful face was now distorted with bruising and swelling, and the examiner noted the deep lacerations on her scalp, likely caused by a blunt object. The crushing blow to her head had caused irreparable damage, leading to her tragic and untimely demise. The signs of abuse and brutal physical trauma were also evident. It was a heartbreaking moment for all involved, as the cause of death was ultimately determined to be asphyxia caused by manual strangulation and blunt force trauma to the head. The discovery of such viciousness added a new level of urgency to the investigation. While analyzing the evidence found at the scene, they discovered some traces of foreign DNA on the victim's clothing. Despite their best efforts, they were unable to match it to anyone known at the time. With the hope of technological advancements in the future, they carefully preserved the evidence, knowing that one day it might lead to a breakthrough in the case. Through their tireless efforts, detectives were able to locate one of the family members who was the brother of the victim with the help of DNA that was extracted from her body. He summoned the courage to come and identify the body. With heavy steps, Thomas Claver, who was 23 years old at the time, walked into the morgue as he gazed upon the still and lifeless form of his beloved sister, Carol Sue Claver, on the cold metal table. Tears streamed down his face. The pain in his heart was overwhelming as he realized that he would never again hear her infectious laugh or see her dazzling smile. With the investigation progressing, the investigators didn't leave any stone unturned. They combed through the community, knocking on doors, speaking to residents, and gathering any information that could provide insight into the tragic incident. They also delved deep into Carol Sue Claver's past, talking to her family and friends to gain a deeper understanding of her life and any possible enemies. The investigators learned that June 4th, 1976 was an ordinary day for the Claver family. Carol Sue Claver, a 16-year-old carefree teenager, hopped onto her bike and rode around town with the wind in her hair and a smile on her face. She greeted the locals, chatted with friends, and basked in the warmth of the summer day. Later in the evening, she plans to meet a friend at Zeno's Hyde Park restaurant. She left her home at 5:30 p.m., but as the sun began to set, a young man in a stylish Chevrolet Monte Carlo car accompanied Claver to her home. According to one of the neighbors, she caught a glimpse of the young man, and he had sandy blonde hair, towering at an impressive 6 feet tall with a slim figure. They exchanged a few words before Carol went inside the house, leaving the man waiting eagerly outside. Minutes later, Carol emerged from the house and got into the car and drove away with the man. It was the last time anyone would see Carol alive. Despite exhaustive efforts by investigators to track down the owners of the suspected vehicles in the town, the murder case of Carol Sue Claver remained unsolved. The leads had dried up, and the case had hit a brick wall, leaving investigators scratching their heads. Eventually, the case went cold, and it would stay like that for over 40 years. After years of darkness, a glimmer of hope emerged in the investigation of Carol Sue Claver's murder. In 2017, two cold case detectives from the Boone County Sheriff's Office, Coy Cox and Tim Adams, breathed new life into the case. Their relentless pursuit of truth and justice for Carol Sue Claver led them to join forces with the original detective on the case, Jerry Keith, who had kept the case close to his heart even after retirement. The trio worked tirelessly. With modern technology, they meticulously combed through the old evidence, interviewing witnesses and sifting through leads to piece together a new perspective on the tragedy that had stumped them for years. They began their investigation by exploring the two prime suspects that Keith had identified earlier. The first suspect was a man who had a track record of car theft and whose vehicle bore an eerie resemblance to the one Carol was last seen in. The detectives set their sights on this man and subjected him to intense scrutiny, hoping to extract any valuable information from him. Despite being a suspect in the investigation, the man denied having any connection to the murder of Carol. He opened up to the detectives, revealing his past misdeeds, but remained steadfast in his claim of innocence in Carol's murder. So the detectives collected his DNA for testing with the DNA that was found in 1976 from the victim's clothing. After the tense wait for the DNA analysis to be completed, the results came in December 2018, and Cox and Adams finally made the call to the man. He was no longer a suspect in Carol's murder, as his DNA had come back as negative. The weight of the world lifted off his shoulders as he realized he could finally breathe easy and start anew. After this, Cox and Adams turned their attention back to their tireless pursuit of the killer. The leads on their first suspect had dried up, and they were back to square one. But then in 2020, they decided to move to their second suspect, who had previously been convicted of a brutal sexual assault in the same area just 2 years after Carol's murder in 1978. His name was Michael Dean Tate, and he was now 77 years old in 2020. As Cox and Adams worked to build their case against Michael Dean Tate, they reached out to his victim in the 1978 assault for her account of the attack. Although her name remained confidential, her recollection of the night was vivid. She described the eerie darkness of the night in Park Hills on October 1, 1978, when she was brutally attacked in her own garage at around 2 a.m. The victim recalled how she screamed and fought with all her might, but her attacker seemed to have a sick pleasure in inflicting pain. However, after 2 hours of hell, the assailant left her bleeding and broken, but alive. It took years for her to recover from the physical and emotional scars that Tate had left with her on that dark and fateful night. With the discovery of Tate's connection to the 1978 case, Cox and Adams could not ignore the possibility that he may have been involved in Carol's murder. Tate's frequent travels to the area for work in the 1970s-1980s, in the same time frame as Carol's murder, made him a strong suspect for investigation. However, even with mounting evidence against him, Tate maintained his innocence and denied any involvement in Carol's death. The detectives had been hopeful that their investigation would finally lead them to the culprit. However, their hopes were soon dashed when the DNA analysis did not match Tate's DNA. In addition, court documents revealed that Tate had been living in Cincinnati in 1976, making it impossible for him to have committed the crime. The detectives wondered if they would ever be able to bring closure to this decades-old mystery, as it once again went dormant. For nearly half a century, the case remained shrouded in mystery. But on September 17, 2022, the Boone County Sheriff's Office reached out to the experts at Othram Lab due to their expertise in genetic genealogy. The Othram team was contacted to work on this case. With funding provided by the Season of Justice, the Kentucky State Police Central Forensic Center sent Othram Labs a DNA sample extracted from the 1976 crime scene. Using advanced forensic-grade genome sequencing, Othram skilled scientists were able to construct a complete DNA profile for the elusive suspect. Their cutting-edge technology allowed them to unlock valuable genetic information that had been hidden for decades. Othram Labs genealogy experts used forensic genetic genealogy to generate investigative leads based on the comprehensive DNA profile they had constructed. In a stunning turn of events, Othram Labs delivered an answer in less than 2 months after receiving the DNA samples on November 25, 2022. By analyzing the genetic information left by the killer, they discovered a connection to a man named Thomas W. Dunaway who had passed away in 1990 at the age of 33. It was revealed that Dunaway had a son who had grown up without ever knowing his father. The detectives traveled to meet with the son of Thomas Dunaway, whose identity was kept confidential, to gather DNA samples for comparison. The results of these crucial laboratory tests would be the key to solving the mystery that had long evaded the grasp of law enforcement. With a determination to uncover the truth and an unshakable commitment to justice, they carefully collected the necessary samples. The long journey to solve the case finally came to an end on December 12, 2022. The use of advanced technology and the unwavering dedication of the detectives had brought justice to Carol Sue Claver and her family after almost 46 years. When Dunaway's son's DNA partially matched the traces of DNA they had found on Carol's body all those many years ago, the process was not an easy one, but the persistence of those involved had paid off, resulting in a breakthrough that would bring closure to all those affected by the tragic events of 1976. The police never gave up on solving the murder case of Carol Sue Claver. Thomas W. Dunaway, who was born on May 20, 1957 and was 19 years old at that time, managed to stay hidden for many years. Through their perseverance, they were able to uncover crucial information about Dunaway's past and the terrible things he had done. The police discovered that he lived near Devo Park, the same place where Carol was last seen with a man who looked like him. As they delved deeper, more damning evidence against Dunaway emerged. Dunaway was not just a once-off criminal. He had been on a 6-month crime spree, leaving a trail of evidence behind in the form of the cars he used to escape each crime scene. The horror did not stop with Carol Sue Claver's death, as he was found guilty of another killing just 6 months later in December 1976. Ronald Townsend, just 19 years old, was found lying on the ground lifeless and bullet-ridden. The community was devastated by the loss, but their spirits were lifted when Thomas Dunaway, the perpetrator behind Townsend's murder, was caught and admitted to his crimes. He was handed a life sentence, but unfortunately, Dunaway was released in 1984 after serving only 7.5 years in prison. The question remains, was justice served, or was it just a fleeting illusion? It was Detective Coy Cox who uncovered the chilling pattern of violence and darkness that consumed Dunaway's life. Although justice may not have been served for Carol's murder, the police managed to expose the full extent of Dunaway's dangerous and deadly reign of terror. The murders of Carol Sue Claver and Ronald Townsend shared something disturbingly similar. Both victims were left in plain sight just inches away from the road, as if the killer wanted to make a statement. As the investigation progressed, authorities uncovered a troubling fact about Dunaway: that he was absent without leave or AWOL from the army when Townsend was murdered. Dunaway had enlisted in the military only 9 days after Carol's death and was initially stationed at Fort Knox before being transferred to Fort Carson in Colorado. Despite being enlisted in the military, Thomas Dunaway couldn't seem to stay out of trouble. Dunaway had a passion for cars that was unmatched, but it ultimately led to his downfall. With a keen eye for a good deal, he traded in his beloved 1973 Chevrolet Monte Carlo for an eye-catching orange Chevrolet Vega. However, little did he know that this flashy car would be the very thing that caught the attention of detectives investigating Ronald Townsend's murder. The detectives relentlessly pursued Dunaway, issuing an all-points bulletin for him and his orange Vega. It was a game of cat and mouse that finally came to an end on the dark Christmas Eve of 1976 when Dunaway was arrested in South Carolina on charges of Townsend's murder and illegal possession of a firearm. As investigators delved deeper into the puzzling case of Carol Sue Claver's murder, they were stumped by the bond between her and Thomas Dunaway. Though they may have crossed paths during their formative years in the Erlanger-Ellesmere Schools District, it was unclear how they became connected later in life. But amidst the confusion, Detective Coy Cox delivered a significant clue that could unravel the mystery: Carol's love for the Vow Park. This verdant oasis held a special place in Carol's heart, and it's possible that her affection for the park led her to a chance encounter with Dunaway. She was known to be outgoing, and it's possible that's how she met him. Perhaps they met by chance in the park, and their paths became intertwined as they shared stories and laughter in that peaceful setting. One thing is certain, the park is important to their connection, as Dunaway lived just a short distance away from where Carol used to ride her bike. The revelation of Thomas Dunaway as Carol Sue Claver's killer brought a mix of relief and sorrow. While the case is considered closed by the authorities, the news that Dunaway passed away on December 28, 1990 at the young age of 33 left the family feeling conflicted. Despite knowing the truth, justice still feels elusive for the Claver family. As Thomas Claver lamented, he couldn't help but wonder what justice meant now and wished he could have confronted Dunaway before his untimely death. The memory of Carol's murder has clung to her brother like a shadow. It's a weight that he's carried for almost half a century, never quite able to shake off the fear that another tragedy could strike his family. He worries endlessly about the safety of his son, Daniel, who is 28 years old, even calling him late at night to check in. He fears losing anyone else dear to him, just like he lost his beloved sister. It's a fear that grips him tightly like a vice, reminding him of the preciousness of every moment and the importance of cherishing those we love. For Thomas Claver, the idea of disturbing his sister's final resting place was unbearable. The thought of disturbing her peaceful slumber just to catch her killer was a heavy burden on his heart. But thankfully, detectives found another way. Instead of exhuming Carol Sue's remains, they were able to exhume the body of her killer. While it may not be the justice that Thomas had hoped for, the fact that his sister's grave remains undisturbed has given him a small sense of solace. For Thomas, it's the small victories that count, and the knowledge that his sister can finally rest in peace. Detective Cox's determination in seeking justice knew no bounds, as evidenced by his recent court order to exhume Dunaway's body for DNA testing. The process of entering the DNA into Cody's may be just the beginning of a new chapter in the pursuit of justice, and Cox is ready to take on whatever challenges lie ahead. After almost half a century, justice was finally served for Carol Sue Claver. Though her killer cannot be tried in a court of law, the Boone County Commonwealth's attorney, Lewis Kelly, has deemed the case closed. The news brought tears to Detective Cox's eyes as he shared the bittersweet moment of informing Carol's brother that the perpetrator had been identified after all these years. While the past cannot be undone, the closure that comes with knowing the truth is a small comfort in the face of such a tragedy. Detective Coy Cox and his team finally solved the 46-year-old mystery of Carol Sue Claver's murder by identifying the perpetrator, Thomas W. Dunaway. This case highlights the dedication of law enforcement in pursuing justice for victims and their families, no matter how long it takes. In the summer of 2010, 19-year-old Ivana Wajark was on the cusp of starting a new chapter. The teenager from Dansk, Poland had completed high school and was waiting to hear back from her university applications and was planning a trip to Spain. On the night of July 16, 2010, Ivana went out to a popular club called the Dream Club in Sopot, Poland. She was with her friend, Andrea, and three of Andrea's male friends, Powell, Marek, and Adrian. According to a witness at the club, Ivana and her friends seemed to be having a good time. But then, Ivana and Adria got into a fight. Ivana reportedly left to cool off before returning to the club in a bad mood. Her friends claimed that the fight started for no particular reason, though investigators believe it was brought on by Ivana's discovery. Her recent ex-boyfriend was partying with other girls in the area. She and her friends then got into another fight, and although her friend tried to stop her, she left the club to walk home alone. Ivana was last seen on surveillance footage captured on a camera at 4:12 a.m. She was walking along a seafront promenade just south of Sopot and was passing the 63rd beach entrance. In the video, Ivana is walking alone, barefoot, and at a brisk pace. Once she leaves the frame, though, she's never seen again. While her home is still 2 kilometers from where the footage was captured, some stretches of her route had no working cameras. According to phone records, Ivana sent text and received calls earlier in the night, but her phone died at 3:49 a.m. with no activity after that. On her way home, Ivana reportedly spoke with Andrea and made amends from their earlier fight. Ivana asked Andrea if she could spend the night at her apartment. Andrea was already home and she left the keys outside for Ivana to let her in, which was a common occurrence for the girls. But the next morning, there was no sign of Ivana, and the keys were still outside. Andrea assumed that Ivana may have gone home after all, but when she called Ivana's mother later that day, she told her that she hadn't seen or heard from her either. Fauna was reported missing, and the search for her began. Police emergency team members, community members, and rescue dogs searched the area repeatedly with no results. Her family and friends even asked for help from a famous Polish psychic, Krzysztof Jakowski, but he couldn't determine where she was. It would become one of Poland's most highly publicized and mysterious missing persons cases, drawing nationwide attention, public scrutiny, and countless theories. The national media coverage of the case ended up doing more harm than good as the police received an overwhelming number of reports related to Ivana. Criminals even started reporting their enemies to the police in connection with her disappearance, and others extorted ransom from her family. The prime suspect in the case comes from the surveillance footage of Ivana. In the video, there's a man wearing a light shirt and a towel draped over his shoulders, who's staggering while walking behind Ivana. Internet sleuths looking into the case, of which there are many, started referring to the man as the towel. The man is seen following Ivana out of frame, and then the same cameras capture the man returning at 6:22 a.m. with the same towel, but no shirt on. While police tried to identify the man, they could never confirm his identity or that he had had any contact with Ivana. Some of the public began to suspect her friends, but investigators concluded that they'd all gone home after the club, which was confirmed by their cell phone logins, camera recordings, and testimonies from those they lived with. Private detective Krzysztof Rutowski was involved in the case from the beginning. He was able to obtain her cell phone records and hard drives before the police, as well as the security footage of her walking down the promenade. But Rutowski's work has been highly criticized, as he's reported many different unverified versions of what happened to Ivana and accused various people of her kidnapping or murder. In August of 2010, Rutowski claimed that he had a witness who saw the kidnapping on July 16th, and that Ivana had been forcibly dragged into a car. In 2011, he said that he had a new suspect, a 24-year-old man named Sasha, who told someone that he and two men abducted and raped a girl in Dansk. Sasha hung himself on January 3, 2011, with no mention of Ivana in the letters he left. It was later discovered he was not in the area the night of Ivana's disappearance. He was over 200 kilometers away. Rutowski later admitted that the information he shared about the witness was a bluff. In 2012, the police investigation was formally closed, but that didn't stop others from searching for Ivana. In 2017, a detective agency in Lampard suspected local garbage truck drivers of Ivana's murder, claiming that in a photo taken on the morning of July 17th, you can see her body in the back of a garbage truck. The drivers had already been interrogated a year after her disappearance. Two of them stated that they didn't remember anything about that morning, but the third man said that he saw Ivana talking to the man with a towel over his shoulders on a bench. The media described the police handling of the case as clumsy. Their work was later investigated by the Supreme Audit Office, which determined they'd failed to publish information about the disappearance to media and failed to secure surveillance footage of Ivana. Ivana's mother also said that telephone records weren't checked until many months after her daughter's disappearance, despite her pressuring police to look into them. On May 19, 2021, Rutowski and his team searched the area where Ivana was last seen and found a shirt in a plastic bag, tights, a skirt, and two knives buried. Rutowski said a former prisoner had led him to the evidence, but according to reports, Ivana hadn't been wearing tights on the night she disappeared, and the knives Rutowski discovered didn't look like they'd been buried for 11 years. Many people have said that Rutowski's involvement in the case has been harmful, leading the media and police down rabbit holes and causing distractions. A journalist covering the case said, "The police stopped cooperating with him a long time ago because it turned out he was lying constantly." Early on in this case, investigators considered that Ivana had run away since there'd been no evidence of kidnapping or murder, although they never found evidence to support that theory. Another theory is that Ivana was a victim of a local serial killer. A week after Ivana's disappearance, a 34-year-old woman was found dead after leaving her friends at a festival. A year later, a 13-year-old girl was murdered north of Sosbat. Both perpetrators are still at large. Lana's disappearance is considered one of the most difficult puzzles Polish investigators have had to uncover. In 2019, the case was passed on to the Malopolska branch of the National Prosecutor's Office in Krakow, so it could be investigated by the Ex-Archive Department, where new technology experts and research institutions are used to examine the evidence. It still currently remains unsolved. On December 13, 2009, 30-year-old Stephen Kocher parked his car at the end of a cul-de-sac retirement community in Henderson, Nevada. In footage captured by nearby home security systems, you can see Stephen get out of his car and leave the area only to return a short time later to retrieve an item from his car and leave again. He has not been seen since. Stephen was originally from Amarillo, Texas, and was a devout Mormon who didn't use drugs or drink alcohol. He'd been living in Salt Lake City, Utah before relocating to St. George, Utah in 2009. Stephen was struggling to find work amidst the Great Recession, but was actively seeking out opportunities. He'd found a job handing out flyers for a window washing company, but it wasn't enough to pay his bills. In the days leading to his disappearance, Stephen made an unscheduled visit to his ex-girlfriend, Anna Marie Neffs. Though she wasn't home, her family invited him in to stay for lunch, where he told him he was on his way to visit family in Sacramento, California. Though instead, he returned to St. George, as he feared bad weather would make his trip difficult. He also spoke to his mother on the phone that day, who said he seemed upbeat as they talked about upcoming Christmas plans. The next day, on December 11th, Stephen was seen helping a couple of children who'd been locked out of their home. He also talked to his bishop, who promised Stephen he'd have a job for him in early 2010, and the bishop noticed that he seemed positive despite the struggles he was facing. On December 12th, the day before his disappearance, Stephen's phone pinged a cell tower near Overton, Nevada, near Lake Mead. He also bought a baby's bib and snacks from the Kmart outside St. George, which were believed to be Christmas gifts for his family. His neighbor recalled seeing him around 10 p.m. that night. Half an hour later, he left his home, but wasn't seen coming back. The next morning, Greg Webb, the president of Stephen's local church ward, called him to tell him that he was in Las Vegas and may not make it in time for a church meeting. He wanted to see if Stephen could lead the meeting instead. Stephen told him that he too was in the Las Vegas area, but he could make it on time if it was necessary. Webb told him not to worry about it. Another church member also called Stephen that day and had a similar conversation. Neither men asked Stephen why he was in the Las Vegas area, but they agreed the conversation seemed normal. Just before noon, a home surveillance camera captured Stephen parking on the cul-de-sac. He got out wearing a white shirt and slacks and was carrying a blue folder or portfolio and didn't appear disoriented. He had no known connections to the Henderson area. At 5 p.m., his phone pinged a cell tower 10 miles north of where his car was parked. 2 hours later, it pinged again another 2 miles north. The next morning, it pinged again another 2 hours north between the Interstate 515 and US Route 93 and Russell Road. That morning, Stephen's phone was used to check his voicemail, and it received a text from his landlord, but there was no activity after that. According to the phone tracking data, Stephen's phone remained in the general vicinity of the last tower ping for 2 days, which suggested his phone died there. The next day, local parking enforcement spotted Stephen's car and started trying to locate its owner. The officer saw a stack of flyers for the window washing company in the car, so he called the phone number that was advertised and spoke to the business owner. The business owner gave him Stephen's cell phone number, but there was no answer. The officer then called Stephen's mother, who didn't answer, but returned the call on December 17th. She then realized no one had heard from Stephen in about a week, so she called his brother and sister, who traveled up to St. George to help find him. They went to jails, morgues, and hospitals in the area to try and locate Stephen with no success. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department also went door to door in the Sun City retirement community in search of witnesses or leads, and also searched the area around it with helicopters and sniffer dogs to no avail. By Christmas, the media had picked up on the story, and in February 2010, his family put out a $10,000 reward to whoever could lead them to Stephen. They also filmed an episode of investigation Discovery show Disappeared in 2011, but but no new leads came from it. Stephen's family believes he went to Henderson in search of a job opportunity, not because he wanted to escape his issues in life. Police say the contents of his car, which included Christmas presents and job applications, suggested he intended to return home. They said that there was no suspicious activity in his bank records or phone records and nothing suspicious on his computers, in his search history, or in his diary, and a theory emerged that he was traveling to traffic drugs. A drug-sniffing dog was brought to his vehicle, but nothing was identified. According to his family, his travel history wasn't unusual, as he was researching his family history in the area and would often take day trips to keep himself busy. At one point, it was suggested that Stephen's disappearance was linked to missing woman, Susan Powell, who disappeared a week prior from her Salt Lake City home. Susan had been having marital problems, and her husband's family suspected that she had run off with Stephen and framed her husband for her murder. The police found no connection between the two missing people and no evidence to support this theory. Utah and Nevada's police are continuing to investigate Stephen's case, but his family has struggled with the uncertainty of his whereabouts. His brother, Dallin, said, "We're stuck between hope and grief because we want to hope for the best, but we can't grieve because we don't know what happened." Gertrude Canning was born in County Donegal and lived with her family outside of Lifford. She shared her family's love of music and dancing and was described by those who knew her as happy and likable with an adventurous spirit. She eventually left Ireland to work at various hotels in England. She was popular with her co-workers and customers. Following the outbreak of World War II, Gertrude joined the Women's Royal Naval Services. She was assigned to the HMS Quebec, a Navy base that was part of the No. 1 Combined Training Center on the shores of Loch Fyne near the small town of Inverary, Scotland. The town had a population of less than 500 people, but between 1940 and 1944, almost a quarter of 1 million soldiers and personnel came through the area to work at the training center, with approximately 15,000 people there at any given time. Gertrude was able to use her previous experience working in the hospitality industry at the base, working in the officers' mess hall at the Admiralty House. On June 30th, 1942, 20-year-old Gertrude left the base, dressed in her uniform, to mail a letter to her father. She never returned. She was reported missing and a massive search for her began. However, it would be 2 local boys who would finally resolve the search. They were gathering wildflowers near a local landmark known as the Marriage Tree when they discovered Gertrude's body in a ditch in Inverary. Gertrude had been gagged with her own clothing and 4 bullets were removed from her body. 3 of the bullets had caused injuries that most likely would have killed Gertrude on their own. Examination of the bullets showed that they had been fired by a standard British Army .30 revolver, a weapon that thousands of men in the immediate area had been issued. 2 roadmen reported seeing Gertrude on the 30th as she was walking along a wooden track. They also reported that they saw a soldier walking in the same direction just a few moments later. Thousands of revolvers were test-fired looking for a match to the bullets found in Gertrude's body. The weapons tested had been assigned to soldiers who were still at the training center and to soldiers who had left it since Gertrude disappeared and had been tracked down and brought back to the center for the testing. Despite the extensive testing, no match to the bullets that killed Gertrude was found. One of the investigators who worked on the case was Detective Inspector Robert Calhoun out of Glasgow. Only a limited amount of information was released to the media at the time of the murder due to its connections to the training center. So much of what is known about the investigation comes from Calhoun's 1962 memoir, Life Begins at Midnight. In the book, he concludes that Gertrude was most likely murdered by a soldier she was familiar with and that, in all probability, he died at Dieppe and his secret died with him. The disastrous August 1942 raid on the German-occupied French port of Dieppe plays a part in more than one theory about the case and how the investigation thousands of casualties at Dieppe. There has also been speculation that certain details about Gertrude's murder were kept quiet because the idea of a soldier committing a murder just outside of the combined training center would further destroy public morale around the war effort, both before the raid occurred, when preparations were being made for it, and afterwards when public confidence was on the decline. Journalist, author, and former Glasgow police officer R.J. Mitchell has raised concerns that Gertrude's killer may have been someone influential in the military, potentially even someone involved with the planning of the raid on Dieppe. During the course of his own investigation into the case, He learned from a military expert that the .38-38 revolver used in Gertrude's murder was only issued to non-commissioned officers and to officers with the rank of second lieutenant or higher. However, it has also been argued that someone with a lower rank could have still acquired one without having it formally issued to them, given how common they were. Another major problem Mitchell has identified with the investigation into Gertrude's murder is the underutilization of the two witnesses who saw Gertrude and the unidentified soldier on the day of her murder. According to Calhoun's account of the investigation in his memoir, there was no composite of the soldier produced. It wouldn't have been difficult to get descriptions and get an artist's impression. Then compare this with the soldier's mugshots and see which branch of the service he came from, Mitchell argued in 2013. The minute I realized that fundamental aspect was missing from Calhoun's book, I thought, this isn't right, and it had the whiff of a cover-up. Despite the decades that have passed since her murder, Gertrude's family has remained committed to her and her story. Several of her nephews have been active in keeping her case in the media. One of those nephews, Liam Canning, has spent years researching his aunt's life and death in hopes of writing a book and believes he may know the identity of a potential suspect. From what has been presented to the family, I could certainly identify who I think is a suspect, he told the BBC in 2012. Police in Scotland have said that if the case were to come before them now, they would solve it. The suspect has never been publicly identified, however, and the case is still unsolved. The Canning family says that their efforts have not been out of malice towards Gertrude's killer and that they do not want revenge against him, just justice for Gertrude. While so far they have not been able to definitively identify her killer, they have found other ways of showing respect for her and her memory. To mark the 70th anniversary of Gertrude's death, the family dedicated a plaque to her memory and Inberry. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.